back to the recap review. Today, I'm going to be talking about an interesting topic. Now, I know that last week I said that I was just going to take a little bit of a break, but I wanted to make this video because one day I was having an interesting conversation with an uninteresting person who had a very vile opinion of anyone who was a fan of the original first 3 years. The first 3 years, 2001 through 2003, are normally what is referred to as the golden years, or the peak of Bionicle. Now, granted, this is all a personal opinion, and one that I do personally share. I do see the first 3 years as fantastic. Maybe, Bionicle had a lot of great moments and years through its run. I personally have my favorite set as the first year entirely. However, that's not to say that the others are bad or worse. I just personally prefer not necessarily the first three, just the first. So, I thought, what made the first 3 years different? What made them the best? What made them the undeniable golden years? Well, that's what this video is for. I'm going to find out. Now, I'm going to be looking at all 3 years, 2001 through to 2003, based on 3 criteria. 1. The story. How has the story changed since 01 to 03? 2. The amount of sets and how their design, coloration, and overall tone have changed. And finally, collectibles. So let's go take a look. And let's start off with the very first year, the beginning, 2001. So, because the setup would take quite a while, I decided I will just go to my display for 2001 sets. Now, as you can probably notice, not a lot of them are very clean right now, and there's some dust. And that brings me to very quickly one thing to say. I do not have a personal fix for dust buildup. I don't personally know one. I would just recommend a glass case over it, which I plan to do at one point. But here we have 2001, the first year. And right off the bat, it's the iconic year. It's the year that pretty much everyone remembers. Tahu, Pohatu, Liwa, all of them. Now, I'm going to look here and see where did Bionicle start. Let's see why this is the designated first golden year. So the story starts off fairly simply, and this is a lot of the reason why people like it. It was always 6 heroes, 1 destiny. It was very basic. Toamata wash up on a golden shore, build themselves back up, and look for the masks to fight Makuta and beat him. Along the way, they'd have to fight deadly Rahi, such as the Tarakava, or, if you can see back there, the Nuijaga. So the story right off the bat was fairly simple. The characters were not the most extraordinarily fleshed out, but they were good characters. They were nice, wholesome characters, and they all added to a nice team, cohesive mesh. It just really worked with the interactions between the characters. Now, obviously the main protagonists would have to be the Toamata. Tahu, the hot-headed, arrogant, but somewhat sensible leader. Pohatu, the funny guy when Lee was out of town. Kopaka, the cool-headed and aloof toe of ice. Gali, the wise and peacekeeper person. Liwa, the clown. That's about it, the clown. And Onua, the quiet and also wise Toa. And so the protagonists worked well, and they all had their abilities of fire, water, air, ice, earth, and stone. They were also accompanied by a couple of other side characters, which you can see here. You had the Mictoran, and people like Jala, and my personal own Takua. He actually did look like that. And some other characters such as Maku or Matoro. And then you also had the village elders, the Turaga. So already you can see there's a plethora of characters. There is just a lot going on here. And you can't even see all the sets. The Muaka and Kenira off to the sides. The Manas are also off to the sides. There is just a lot going on here, and it looks alive. And the story was alive. There was a lot to go on. In 2001, we were being introduced to the island of Matanui. There was so much mystery surrounding it. Where did the Toa come from? What is the island? Where is the island? What is with the Turaga and their secrets? What is going on? And so there was a lot of mystery and intrigue, and that interested people. So that is probably why people really enjoyed the first year. It had very nice, just characters that worked and corresponded with their elements, side characters that helped interact with the main characters, and fairly nondescript enemies to fight, with one goal in mind: defeat Makuta. So honestly, it was a very simple year. It was easy to understand, and it was the introduction. There was a lot of intrigue and mystique, and that's why people enjoyed 2001's story. Now, let's look at sets. In 2001, there were 23 sets released. Now, like I said, there's a lot going on here. You can see there are a lot of sets. 23 is not a small number when it comes to stuff like this. It may seem smaller as we get into later years, but that's another story for another day. So, let's look at the set design. See if I can zoom out just a smidge. There we go. So as you can see, the sets are colorful. They are extremely vibrant. They all have their own theme that makes them unique. Fire's here. It looks obviously like a fire tribe. Why? Because it's red. Then you have Kopaka and Gali and Likoro and Onukoro. And they all encompass a kind of a personality, because their design looks so similar. They all look very robotic. The thing with the Toamata, though, is they look rookie-ish. They look kind of skinny and spindly at times, but they are formidable. They're just rookie-ish almost, and that works with the story very well. It gives them a sense of, I'd almost like to say, relatability. It's the same people like Spider-Man, because apparently, he's relatable. These guys look cool. Like Spider-Man looks cool. Then you have the Turaga and the Matoran, and they are great side characters. You see, LEGO could have just gone ahead and said, Matoran, Toa, Rahi, we're done. However, we got the Turaga as well. Each tribe normally had an average of 3 characters that you could have. That's great. And they also had the Matoran. You see, the exception to the 3 characters rule was kind of broken with the Power Pack and Hafu over here, but no one's complaining. Hafu's a fun character. So the set design, it looks vibrant. It looks characteristic. It looks fun. And that is what 2001 was all about. It was fun. Now the Rahi were also extremely impressive, having fantastic functions and looking formidable and like great opponents for the Toamata to fight. They were just so weird though. They were animals, and the animals fought the Toa, and you weren't really sure why until you saw the infected masks, and then you knew why. And it just, this year right here, all you can see is a world that has been built by you. So the set design, like I said, is very vibrant and very attractive to one's eyes. They want to be a part of this, to understand all this. And that's why people enjoy 2001. It has a very vibrant, bright, and inviting theme. So finally, let's look at collectibles. Now, I did some research. I was crunching some numbers, and right off the bat, what stood out to me was the amount of collectibles in just the first year. Now, when I say collectibles, I mean the 2001 collectibles, which were the masks. Now, my calculations came to a total of 77 individual collectibles. This is including things like the golden the snail, the golden carrot how, the gold how, and the chrome how. This is, however, not including things such as misprints. I do not count those because they were not released for public purchase. So, but yeah, it had a healthy amount of collectibles that you could add to your collection. 6 masks, including their defaults, for each Toa, and then 6 masks, including the defaults, for each Turaga. That was spectacular. So all in all, 2001 was just a very good place to start. It was extremely vibrant, inviting, and warm, and mysterious, and people loved the mystery. They loved the coolness of Kopaka, the fiery heat and courage of Tahu. They loved the theme and its encompassing world. So that's why 2001 is the first golden year. Granted, it did have its flaws, do not get me wrong, and I have gone over those in individual reviews. But now let's look at the sequel year, the continuation directly after the end of 2001, where Makuta was defeated by the Toamata, only to come across a new threat, the Borak. Let's go check out 2002. So here we have 2002, and again on location. 2002 came with the release and reveal of the Borak as the new enemies. This opened up a lot. This allowed the Toa to not only be able to fight the Rahi, but be able to fight the Borak too. Now, like 2001, they could have just released the Borak, released the Toa, released Titans, bam, done. But they did not stop there. They went ahead and also released the Borak Va. And I find that to be extremely interesting. My apologies for the camera shaking. So, what about the story? The story takes place immediately after the end of 2001, with the Borak swarms being awakened by Makuta to give him some time to recuperate after his unfortunate loss. So the Borak's one mission is quite simple. Clean it all, it must be cleaned. And they go to work disassembling and destroying the island of Atanui. Obviously that ain't happening. So, the Toa go out, still as Toamata, but with golden Kanohi masks. The Toa go out to fight the Borak. And in the end, they fight the Borak Queens and succeed, getting transformed in the process to the Toa Nuva you see here. So the story is a direct continuation. It's not a rehash. It's just more so just a modification. You see, instead of one sole villain, there were technically 2 this time, the Borak Queens, and the overarching swarm. Unfortunately, this did give way to a lot of reused builds. Granted, the Borak build is quite fantastic, but it is fairly substandard. The Toa Nuva, on the other hand, were greatly improved, which is fantastic. The Titans were pretty good. Not as many as the prior year, but enough. So the story was a good continuation, pretty fair, and it kept all the original characters and that same feel of mystery. Where'd the Borak come from? What's energized Protodermis? Questions. Some answers, but not many. Just enough to keep you wondering. So that's a story, and that's why people were brought back, because it was a good continuation. They were interested to see more. But what about the sets? Well, in 2002, surprisingly enough, there was only 22 sets released. By only, I mean that in the sense that it's one less than 2001, which actually kind of surprised me. You got the Borak Va, you got the Toa Nuva, and then the Titans, and the Bionicle Master Builder. But there was still a fair amount of sets, one less than last year, but not very many people noticed. Sure, the majority of the lack of sets, and by sets I mean set, probably went into the fact that there were less Titans. In this case only being 3 major Titans released, despite there being 2 Titan models, Kadak and Gadak. So, the sets, the amount was okay. Now, what about the design? You see, in the first half, the Borak and the Borak Va and the Toa Nuva kept, well, not the Toa Nuva were not in the first half, but the Borak and the Borak Va kept a very consistent feel and vibe to the whole open, welcome, enjoyable feeling that you got from looking at the Toamata and the Rahi, the Matoran and Turaga from the first year. They kept that same look and feel because they were all vibrant and they were all very enjoyable to look at. Granted, in 2002, things kind of toned down in the color department with the introduction of quite large amounts of gray in the Titans and the Bionicle Master Builder. Orange was very predominantly featured as well. This is not really a big deal, but it does slightly darken the Titans, the larger sets here. And when the Toa Nuva were released, they were released with armor, silver armor, which did give them a more metallic and steel-like look. Now, this is interesting because the Toa Nuva do look like upgraded versions of the Toa Mata. However, they also look a little bit more advanced. And this overall gives the year a kind of almost darker looking feel. Not by much, just a little bit darker, more metallic and more modernized. And I can see how for some that would detract from the lush, green-ish, planty-ish, fire-ish, vibrant feel of the prior year. Granted, it was still a good continuation, very impressive, especially with what I have to say next. Moving on to the final part of this, Collectibles. In 2002, I found out that the amount of collectibles released was an astounding 145 individual collectibles. If you got one of every collectible, you know, Krana, from both the Borak and the Va, and then the Nuva masks, it would amount to 145. And that is a huge jump from the 77 of the prior year. So overall, 2002 kept all the initial concepts and the world that 2001 had set up and created. And that was a good thing. And that's why, according to Bionicle writer Greg Farshdi, 2002 was their most profitable year. And a great way for them to expand. And expand they did. Now, let's look at the final year in these 3 golden years, 2003. And so here we are at 2003, and my apologies for the shaky cam earlier. It is not very easy to get a good shot of the 2002 sets, so this should be better. So here we are, 2003, and let's talk about the story. Story takes place a good amount of time after the end of 2002. The Matoran are rebuilding their Koros and their homes after what the Borak did to it, and the Toa Nuva are now up and about with their new powers. Unfortunately, the Borak Kal come along and take their powers in an attempt to try and awaken the Barag from their imprisonment. Well, the Borak Kal are mysterious super Borak. They're like the elite Borak. And so they're running around, and the Toa Nuva end up beating them. Now, 2003 is the first Bionicle story year that is a two-parter. That's the first part. Second part revolves around the Mask of Light and that whole story. You know the movie, but to recap, Takua and Jala find the Mask of Light, and it is foretold that they need to find the 7th Toa, and after harrowing adventures, they find out that Takua is Takanuva, the 7th Toa, and the Toa of Light. And so he fights Makuta and wins, and they uncover the legendary city of Metru Nui. So the story is a good continuation as well. It ends up with a lot of good things. We get some good parts. We get to see more of our favorite characters, and we get a second Mat Nui Online game. We also get to see all the Matoran have upgraded in sorts. They've been rebuilt in the stronger forms. So, as far as the story goes, it is a it's a fresh start in that there's a lot more mystery and intrigue, and it leads into the next year very nicely. Granted, you know, the Borak Kal are pretty much just silver Borak, and there are very few unique sets, but it still works. Overall, the 2003 story was a good way to end this kind of trilogy, because we had all of our favorite characters. The majority of the time, the Toa Nuva showed up and fought the bad guys, and it still had that feeling that this was on Mat Nui. This was still the Island of Mat Nui. This was the same story, the same characters that we had, just things are a bit different now. Unfortunately, their enemies were a lot stronger and a lot smarter. Granted, the story did get a tad bit darker at this point. There was a lot of issues regarding Tahu and getting infected by this guy over here, and Makuta was a lot more in play. And there were actually character deaths. Jala died temporarily. Makuta was thought to be dead. Takanuva technically did die too. Allegedly. And so the overall story tone did get a bit darker. But it was still the island of Matanui. We still got to see all the beautiful scenery. And, well, we liked it. We were happy. It was the same old island, and we had not left yet. So the story, while a little bit darker, did continue the narrative. It did continue the story of the Toa and their quest to defeat Makuta, who was defeated again. So the story, while it was just different from the first two. So that's probably what drew people in, and it did tell a more serious story in comparison. Granted, Bionicle has mostly been serious, it's just a little bit of a darker tone. Now, as far as sets go, 2003 follows suit with having 22 sets to its names, exactly like its previous year, 2002. 2003, we look at the set design, and obviously, there's not a huge amount of variety. There are the Rakshi, which are all the same, sans the coloration. And there are the Borakal, which are basically rehashed Borak. The Matoran are a nice change, and Titans are, while not the most complex, fun to play with and to look at. But something I've noticed, you see, I hear very often that 2004 was the major game changer. It was the shift. It got so dark in color. I think, and I would argue, that the tone shift actually started in 2003. You see, there's a copious amount of silver, and silver is a very metallic color, as you well know. They still kept the bright colors, like the bright greens and blues and reds. That's great. However, in 2001 and 2002, those colors were accented by colors of similar nature that complemented them. As you can see here, there's a lot of silver and gray. It visibly looks like a darker year, and that does coincide very well with the storytelling narrative. But this is very different for Bionicle. The first 2 years were very warm and welcoming and very open to do whatever with. And this year is much darker. It is noticeably darker and grayer, and that does set a different tone. Maybe a more mature one, maybe just a darker one. But either way, this definitely does not look as appealing as 2001 and 2002. Now, the sets themselves are very solid. The Borak design, like I've said, is a very good design. And the Rakshi did a lot for Bionicle. They are good sets. And the Matoran are as well. The designs are good. Definitely. But, like I said, my major thing here was that it's a noticeably darker tone. Personally, I'm not a big fan of it, but this is the third year and it's leading into a much darker, a much different storytelling narrative. So with sets out of the way, they're all good sets, and it has a pretty decent story to go along with it. What about collectibles? After looking it up, crunching all the numbers, looking at all the individual Krata, and Kanohi masks, the absolute total amount of individual collectibles that you could get in 2003 ranks up at an astonishing 313 collectibles. That is a huge spike from the 145 we saw in 2002 and the 77 in 2001. The amount of collectibles here adds so much to the world. LEGO in 2003 did even more world building, despite being on the exact same island. They gave us so many possibilities with the Rakshi. Not as many with the Chronicale and whatnot, but it was still there. The variety was there. And then we had the Kanohi Nuva masks that were still coming out. Granted, that total does not count the Nuva masks. It counts only the silver Nuva masks. But overall, this was a nice way to cap off the trifecta, the 3 years that Bionicle started off with. It led into a new story that would go look and answer questions about the Turaga and their pasts, and maybe even more. Like, why are they on the island? Why did they need to get rebuilt? Where are the Toamata from? So, let's move on to just my final thoughts on the entire matter. So we have just looked at the first 3 years of Bionicle, which is an astounding accomplishment. We've seen that in 2001, what drew people in was the open, fresh, intriguing story that was the beginning of Bionicle, and its sets looked fantastic. The characters were vibrant and full of life and a lot of fun. And the amount of collectibles for its time was very, very substantial. In 2002, they continued with that and got the formula down fairly nicely. Granted, there were some changes, but if you were following the story in the first year, then the second year is a fantastic compliment. And then the third year, the tone shifts entirely. Not drastically, just it shifts gradually. And it's just very interesting to watch how it kind of turns into that. And you can start to see that in 2002. In the sets, the addition of heavier usage of gray and just the overall plot. I mean, think about it. In 2002, would you really like to have a bunch of aliens coming on your turf and abducting your people? No, you wouldn't. And so that's kind of where they were in 2002. And the tone is just very interesting throughout the entire 3 years. In the beginning, it was just new, and it had a lot of fun with itself. It had a lot of fun just creating a world for other people to be a part of and enjoy. 2002, it expanded on that world, and in 2003, it decided, let's tie up some loose ends here, and let's go see another world. Let's answer some of the questions that so many people have asked since the very beginning. And so it gradually does continue, and if you follow it, you grow up with it, then it follows along with you as well. And that is very, very nice to see. And that's really why people like the first 3 years. It grew up with people, and it just was a lot of fun to enjoy. I'm not saying the first 3 years are perfect, by no means. They are just very enjoyable, and where a lot of people got into the series. And you gotta admit, there is some appeal to how those sets look and how the characters are, and how it pretty much entirely began. With this mask, with a beach, but I don't have a beach here, with water and canisters, which I also don't have here. And so I can definitely understand, despite not getting into Bionicle in the first year, being a part of the first 3 was spectacular. And that is why I personally believe people think the first 3 years are golden. So thank you all very much for watching. That has been the first 3 years of Bionicle. Now, I am still going to take that there break and get everything prepared for the City of Legends, and we are going to review 2004. I don't know where I'll start or when, but it should be pretty soon, so keep an eye out. I'll keep you guys updated. Thank you all very much for watching, and if you have any questions, please ask them in any of the videos, unless it has to do with me reviewing Uparu and the Mectoran review. In that case, I will probably have to write your name down on a piece of paper and light it on fire. But thank you all very much for your participation, your questions, and your viewership. It is great to read everything you guys say and suggest. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you again at some point in the future. Farewell.